And it is that God speaks that a firmament be placed in the midst of the waters, to divide the waters from the waters. This firmament, it is an object. Continuing with verse 7. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. Now so far all we can gather is that there is an object that was placed in the midst of the waters to divide water from water. Meaning there is water below this object and there is water above this object. Now we'll have to continue to verse 8 to figure out what this object is. Let's please do so. And it is as follows. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Well, now we found a fact. The fact is that the firmament, the object which divided the waters below from the waters above, we now know to be heaven. And also within this verse, we have found an inference. The inference being that time does not change. Once set in motion, it will continue in its cycle. So from the godly time to the earthly creation time, time does not change. Period. We infer this because the evening and the morning were the second day. But even more importantly, here we find yet again that God has given something a title. Here we find that the firmament is titled heaven. What a word to use, right? Heaven. Now we may casually say a phrase similar to the birds fly in the heavens. Okay. Whereas God may also refer to it as being the fowl flew within the firmament. Same concept. The firmament given the title heaven. Continuing with verse 9, we read, And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Here we find that yet again God speaks. And when He speaks something, it happens. His will be done. And God said, Let the waters be gathered unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So what does that tell us about the earth? It once was a muddy planet, covered in mud, no separation of the soil from the water. But here in verse 9 we find that God does indeed separate the water from the soil. And He does it under the heaven. So the heaven, we can infer, is the atmosphere by which the waters above, we can infer, would be the rain or the rain clouds. And the earth is separated from the water, and it is so. So we see this much thus far. But how is it so? Well, I can infer that since the earth was not separated from the waters prior to the creation of the firmament called heaven, that this heaven had a role to play in separating the soil from the water. And looking at common knowledge as we may know it now, we could assume that this heaven was an atmosphere by which the light entered, causing a sort of greenhouse effect, and may have also produced winds, causing the water to subside from the soil, thus separating the earth from the water. And with that inference, I can now say it was so. Now, we don't have to look too close to discover that our definition of earth was indeed correct in verse 10. And let's see what else we can gather from verse 10. Verse 10 states, "And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good." This verse validates that the earth and the waters were once mixed, creating a muddy planet. So with verse 10, we see that God gave us what we now and always have called the parts of the planet. He titled earth, earth, and he titled seas, seas. And since that time, that's what we've always known it to be. Now you may say, well, what about an ocean? Well, the definition of ocean is, in fact, a vast sea. But more importantly, God saw that it was good. So, when it was a mucky, muddy mess, it was no good. But now that the water has separated from the dry land, it is good. And God saw that. But why is this newly shaped, freshly formed earth and sea good to begin with? Well, let's find out. Now on to verse 11. "And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can infer back to verse 10 the reason why God saw that it was good that the planet was no longer a muddy, mucky mess. After having divided the water from the dry land, it had set the stage for plant life to grow upon the planet. And we can see that in verse 11 that there are three particular types of plant life that will emerge. And those types are grass, herbs, and fruit trees. God said, "Let the earth bring forth," and the earth did indeed bring forth in accordance with the will of God, as stated in verse 12, which reads, "And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good." You know, it's amazing, but it makes me wonder why all these acts that God has committed thus far, why is it that he sees that they are good? Well, I got a feeling we're about to find out. Verse 13 follows up by saying, "And the evening and the morning were the third day." So, within 3 days, we have witnessed the creation of the earth. as a planet. Verse 14. And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. It is now time to start using common sense. Regular, street smart, book learned, laid back lower layman knowledge. I'm talking Occam's razor at its finest. As we try to understand verse 14. You and I could safely assume that the lights mentioned in this verse refer to the sun, the moon, and the stars. However, we will have to read further to know for sure. But what about the signs, the seasons, the days and the years? Although I cannot make an assumption nor an inference on what it means by signs, I can explain seasons, days, and years. If God were to remain stationary upon the earth and witness the sun as it traveled across the sky, crossing the path of one of the fruit trees by which God planted stationary upon the earth, he would witness the shadow of that fruit tree as it moved across the ground, as the sun traveled across the heaven. With that said, the shadow may appear to be at a specific point at a specific time of the day for one instant. And given another time of the day, the shadow would be in another spot. And a third time of the day, a third spot. Well, of those three spots, as time goes on through daily cycles, we will find that each spot slightly shifts. This is a seasonal shift. They shift ever so slightly as time gradually goes on, according to the position of the sun. So, if God is sitting or standing and watching the shadow of this tree as the sun crosses the sky